the abyss of thought, how thinking too much can destroy action, peace, and reality itself. But let me ask you something that might challenge your entire way of being. Is it possible that thinking too deeply, something we admire, strive for, and even celebrate, it is silently unraveling your life? That the very act of thinking, when taken too far, is not a virtue, but a hidden poison. Imagine this: you're sitting alone, late at night, staring at your ceiling, your thoughts racing not about meaningless things, but about everything. Your purpose, your choices, the universe, the meaning of your actions. You feel like you're getting somewhere profound, uncovering some great truth, but hours pass, your body is tense, your mind is tired, and at the end of it all, you haven't done a thing. You're not enlightened. You're exhausted, and nothing has changed. This is the dark side of deep thinking. It feels like progress, but often it's just mental quicksand pulling you deeper into your own mind, away from action, away from peace, away from life. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying thinking is bad. Thinking is a gift. The ability to reason, to reflect, to question, that's what separates us from animals, right? But here's the paradox. That same ability, when used recklessly or excessively, becomes a trap. The greatest philosophers knew this. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." But Buddha warned, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Notice the tension? One celebrates thought, the other fears its power. So here's the real question: when does thinking stop being a tool and start becoming a curse? That's what we're diving into. Because thinking too deeply, especially without limits, can lead to 3 devastating outcomes: paralysis, detachment from reality, and the collapse of meaning itself.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Let's start with paralysis: mental, emotional, existential. But the deeper you think, the more layers you peel back. And at first, this feels like wisdom. You see connections, complexities, contradictions. You feel like you're getting closer to the truth. But suddenly it becomes harder to make simple choices. Nothing feels clear. Every action becomes burdened by what-ifs, maybes, could be better. You hesitate, you delay, you freeze. Let's bring it into your real life. Have you ever overanalyzed a text message before sending it? Spent hours debating whether to accept a job, enter a relationship, move cities, try something new? Not because you're lazy, but because you thought too deeply. You saw too many possibilities, too many outcomes. And you told yourself, I just need to think a bit more. But did that thinking free you? Or did it trap you? The truth is, deep thinking can become a false idol. We worship it. We think the deeper we go, the closer we get to enlightenment. But enlightenment isn't found in endless analysis. It's found in clarity, in action, in presence. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius didn't spend his life contemplating abstractions. He acted, he ruled, he lived according to his principles. For him, thinking was a means, not an end. He said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's it. Be one. In contrast, the danger of overthinking is that we spend our lives arguing in our heads and never being. Now, let's explore the second hidden danger: detachment from reality. When we think too deeply, especially about abstract concepts, we begin to lose touch with the real. tangible world. Life becomes theoretical. People become ideas. Experiences become data. And we begin to live in a constructed mental universe rather than in the rawness of now. Think about this. Have you ever been so lost in your thoughts about existence, about philosophy, about meaning that you couldn't enjoy a simple meal? Couldn't be present with friends? Couldn't feel because you were too busy thinking? That's detachment, and it's dangerous. Why? Because life isn't lived in your mind. It's lived in the moments between thoughts, the laughter, the touch, the breath, the risk. When you think too deeply, you abstract yourself from these moments. You become an observer, not a participant. And slowly, subtly, life starts to feel unreal, like you're watching it from the outside. This is not just poetic. Psychologists call this derealization, a real phenomenon where people feel disconnected from the world. And deep, obsessive thinking can cause it. What's worse, you don't even realize it's happening. You just feel numb, alienated, confused, and you don't know why. Let's get even more profound. The third danger is the collapse of meaning. The deeper you analyze something, your beliefs, your goals, your identity, the more unstable it can become. Let's say you believe in kindness. You start thinking, why be kind? Is kindness just evolutionary biology? A social construct? A way to gain favor? Suddenly, kindness feels hollow. You've overanalyzed it. You took something meaningful and dissected it until it bled. That's the danger. Deep thought can dissolve meaning. It can strip life of its magic, its mystery, its emotion. Nietzsche warned about this. He said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." In our context, the monster is the endless search for truth. If you stare into that abyss too long, you lose yourself. You become cold, detached, cynical. And eventually, nothing feels worth doing because you've thought your way out of caring. Now here's the twist. This collapse doesn't lead to liberation. It leads to existential despair. You question everything. You trust nothing. You feel like nothing matters. That's not enlightenment. That's nihilism. And the worst part, it's self-inflicted. You thought too hard, too long, too deep, and now you're drowning in your own mind. So ask yourself, has thinking deeply made your life richer or emptier? Have you gained wisdom or just doubt? Be honest. Let's pivot. What's the solution? It's not to stop thinking. It's to discipline your thinking. It's to know when to stop. To choose presence over pondering, action over abstraction, faith over doubt. This is not about ignorance. It's about balance. The great thinkers Socrates, Buddha, Epictetus, they didn't just think. They lived. They walked. They taught. They acted. Their thoughts served life, not the other way around. And that's your challenge. Let thought serve life. Don't let it replace life. Here's a practice. When you find yourself thinking too deeply, ask, what am I avoiding? Because often we use deep thought to avoid fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of pain. Thinking becomes a shield. But a shield can also be a prison. The only way out is action. Not reckless, but courageous. Thoughtful, but done. Let me leave you with this. The deepest wisdom is often the simplest. Love, act, be present, trust. These are not complex ideas, but they are harder than thinking because they require being, and being fully, vulnerably, boldly is the one thing deep thinking can't do for you. Let's pick up from the edge of that cliff, the one where your mind stands, peering into the endless abyss of analysis, wondering if jumping into life is worth the risk. You've thought and thought, you've dissected every possibility, and what's left? You paralyzed, isolated, and robbed of meaning. The haunting reality is that thinking too deeply without balance, without limits, becomes a prison made of your own intelligence. But what if I told you that freedom doesn't lie in thinking more, but in thinking less, or more accurately, in thinking differently? Not with obsession, but with intention. Not with fear, but with trust. Not for control, but for connection. What if real power, the kind that moves mountains, builds lives, and changes the world, doesn't come from thinking deeply, but from knowing when to stop thinking and start being? Let's explore something radical. The mind is not designed to know everything. It's designed to navigate the unknown. When we think deeply, we crave certainty about life, about ourselves, about the universe. But life is not a puzzle with a solution. It's a flow, an ever-changing, unpredictable force that we are meant to join, not dominate. Deep thinking is often an act of resistance, a rebellion against the unpredictable nature of existence. We think and think, trying to carve out certainty, to create safety in a chaotic world. But in that rebellion, we lose our way. The more we resist the uncertainty of life, the more we suffer. The key is not to master life through thought, it's to partner with it through action, through surrender, through presence. Here's where it gets intense. Thinking too deeply can fracture your identity. Imagine yourself as a river flowing freely, instinctively, with a rhythm that is natural and true. Now imagine damming that river with thoughts, questions about your worth, your future, your purpose. What happens? The flow stops. The energy stagnates. You feel stuck. Deep thought, unchecked, can separate you from your instincts, your creativity, your ability to act from the gut. And here's the mind-bending part. Your truest self is not something you think into existence. It's something you uncover through living, and through experience, through doing. The self is not a theory, it's an action. And the more you think about who you are, the less you become who you are. Let me drop a heavy question on you. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to understand it perfectly and just lived it courageously? What decisions would you make? What relationships would you pursue? What passions would you unleash? The truth is, thinking too deeply often means postponing real living. We convince ourselves that once we understand enough, once we've thought it through completely, then we'll act. But that day never comes. It's a mirage on the horizon. The solution is not more thought, it's commitment. At some point you have to say, this is enough. I've thought enough. Now I act. That's where life begins. That's where power begins. There's a deep philosophical irony here. The people who think the most deeply are often those who trust the least in themselves, in others, in life. And this lack of trust fuels the need to think more. It's a vicious cycle. But here's the escape. Learn to trust yourself, not your thoughts. Thus, Your thoughts are just tools, not truths. They are options, not orders. And often your best decisions come not from thinking, but from listening to your intuition, your body, your experience. Think about it. How many times have you felt something was right or wrong before you thought about it? That's your inner compass. But when you think too deeply, you drown out that signal. You stop hearing yourself. Let me take you into the life of someone who broke this cycle. A woman named Lara spent years thinking about writing a book. She had the talent, the ideas, the passion, but every time she sat down to write, she spiraled. Is this the right topic? Will people like it? What if I'm wasting time? What if I fail? Days turned to months, months to years. She was trapped in her own mind. Then one day she stopped asking. She stopped thinking. She just wrote, imperfectly, clumsily, but consistently. And that book changed her life. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And her breakthrough wasn't intellectual. It was existential. She realized that action creates clarity, not the other way around. This brings us to a profound truth. The mind can only take you so far. The rest is lived. You can read every philosophy book, meditate for hours, analyze every choice, but until you engage with life, you're just a spectator. And spectators don't win. Spectators don't feel the thrill of risk, the satisfaction of creation, the joy of connection. Spectators watch. Players live. So here's the dare. Stop thinking like a spectator. Start playing. Now, let's tackle fear, the real fuel behind excessive thought. You don't think deeply for fun. You think deeply because you're afraid. You're afraid of making the wrong choice. You're afraid of missing out. You're afraid of being judged, failing, hurting, living. But here's the kicker. Fear doesn't go away through thought. It goes away through movement. Fear is a fog, and the only way to clear it is to walk through it. The more you act, the more fear loses its grip. And the more you realize that fear was never as big as it seemed, it was just magnified by your mind. Think about this. What fear is ruling your thoughts right now? What would happen if you stopped thinking about it and just faced it? There's one more dimension we need to explore: the impact of deep thought on your relationships. When you think too much, especially about people, you start managing them instead of connecting with them. You analyze their words, predict their motives, rehearse conversations. You become strategic, not authentic. And slowly you lose intimacy. Why? Because real connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is messy, unpredictable, real. Deep thought tries to sterilize that, to control it, to avoid pain. But in doing so, it kills love. Love can't be controlled. It can only be lived. And that's why the people who think too much about relationships often feel alone. They're in their heads, not in the moment. So what's the path out? It's simple but not easy. You have to choose to live differently, not recklessly, not thoughtlessly, but bravely. You have to set boundaries for your mind, decide when to think and when to act, when to analyze and when to feel. And above all, you have to trust that life will meet you, support you, shape you after you act, not before. That's the leap, and it's terrifying, but it's the only way to live fully. Let me close with a vision. Imagine waking up and not drowning in thought. but feeling light, free, engaged. But imagine making decisions without torment, connecting with people without scripts, pursuing your dreams without delay. That life is possible. It begins not with more thought, but with less. Not with depth, but with clarity. Not with fear, but with faith. The mind is a tool. Use it, then put it down, and live. Oh,